Hi, everyone. Welcome to A Word with Kelly Scott Reed. We're here with Jane Ayres today. Jane, welcome to the show.
Hello, and thanks very much for having me. And yeah, looking forward to having a chat.
It really is just like a chat. We're just gonna we're just gonna go through and have a conversation because we're familiar at the Yaw Press with your work because we have published it. Excellent work. We
Thank
absolutely
you.
love it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you're coming to us from, what type of writing that you do mostly.
Um, um, well, I'm in the UK. I was born in Peterborough and moved to Kent. So I've lived in Kent for the last 30 odd years, quite a while. So yeah. So and I've always written. It's kind of about the one constant. Um, and I've always loved writing, and it's kind of come and gone at different times throughout my life, depending on what's happening. But I just love the process of writing and editing. And yeah, I started out when I was in my teens. I was a pony mad girl. And I used to write pony stories for years and years and years. And a lot of my pony books are on Amazon, which were books for teenage girls about ponies. And yeah, I did that for a long, long time. And I've written, I write for women's magazines as well, and have short stories in Women's Weekly and magazines like that. And what else? Um, I write a few horror stories as well. Not very much, but I really enjoy horror films, so I write a little bit of horror. And quite a lot of my poems are sort of horror poetry, I realised when I was kind of looking at it sometimes. But yeah, and I had a spate for about 10 years, way back, where I was writing erotica under a completely different pen name. And that was interesting. That was quite fun. So I've done lots and lots of different things with writing, really. But poetry is my passion, and I kind of came to that quite late in life, I think, really. I mean, I did used to write poetry in my teens, most of which I would call as my angst poetry, about relationships and romance and all of that kind of stuff. And then I didn't read poetry. I didn't really think that it was for me, and kind of stumbled upon it accidentally, really. Just stop me, by the way, because I will babble on.
No, I'm interested. I was going to ask you about poetry for you. What makes it different for you than writing other things? What is the difference for you in the process of poetry and writing prose?
Oh gosh, I know poetry just feels God. When I sort of just rediscovered poetry, it the only way I could describe it, it felt like um, I'd sort of someone had turned a tap on in me, and I couldn't actually turn it off. That's what it felt like for about the first year. It was amazing, and I literally could not stop writing. I had bits of paper all over the place, and words would just come into my head, and I would jot them down. And so it was, yeah, it was a really powerful thing. And I mean, that kind of lasted for about a year, and it slowed down quite a lot. But I do have little bursts where I have periods of time where I just write lots, and then long periods where I don't write very much. But I suppose for me with poetry, I just love the fact that it just feels so I can't think of the word, which is ironic. It's I think one thing I find very satisfying about poetry is because it's a shorter form. So it can be quite satisfying that you can get pieces of work completed in a shorter time than if you were writing a novel, for example. When I used to write short novels for children, but the idea of writing a novel of, say, 90,000 words would feel completely overwhelming, completely daunting. I just don't know how I would wrangle all those words, to be honest. But with poetry, you can have a tiny poem, you can have a longer poem. I don't know, it just feels, at the moment, it feels very much the way I can express myself, the way that I can process emotion, and whether that's sadness, grief, anger. So it's quite therapeutic in a way, but then a lot of it's very abstract as well. And I think what I love about poetry is, and this is not going to make any sense at all, is you can be writing something and you think that you're writing about one thing, and then you realize, maybe not straight away, maybe a long time afterwards, that actually it's about something else. So even though you're producing it, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of hidden there that even you don't necessarily realize. So it's kind of layers, I suppose, really. I mean, just a sort of an example, I was looking at the poems that you've published of mine, and I was so chuffed when you took the lot, because you took 4 poems last time. I was just so happy about that. And it was really weird, because I read through the poems again and I thought, good God, I mean, you might have noticed this, but I didn't at the time. 3 of the poems have hearts in them, and the hearts are variously broken, char-grilled and eaten. And I never realized when I wrote the poems and put them together that they had, that 3 of them had that thread. So, and you think, oh, okay, that's interesting. So that's one of the things I really do love about it. I mean, I remember when I started writing poetry, and a lot of my poetry is, I suppose I'd call it memoir poetry. To start with, when I was writing, I thought that I was writing about processing. I had a hysterectomy some years ago, and it was kind of a way of emotionally processing that. And I thought that that's what I was doing with my poems. And it was only when other people were reading them and I looked back and I realized that actually I wasn't just processing that, I was processing grief from losing my parents. So there was all sorts of other things going on that I wasn't necessarily conscious of.
Yeah, I totally relate with that when you're saying it, because I write songs mostly, which tend to be much, like, even less than poetry, much simpler, because the melody, the music comes in and adds some emotion to what you're writing. But I had written a song 20 some odd years ago with my husband, and I wrote it about my ex, what I thought was about my ex-husband, but it was actually about me in the terms of the relationship of my ex-husband. And as I read it 20 years later, or hear it 20 years later, I'm like, oh, that's all about me. And I thought it was about him. Oh no. Yeah. Just to add to that, the poems that you wrote that we published with the hearts in it, sometimes when we pick things, it is because they feel cohesive. I'm not sure, I can't recall if that was the reason, but sometimes there's a cohesion to it. If we do more than one, like, ooh, they fit really beautifully together, those 3, those 4. And it's just interesting, because I'll have to go back and look, because I would love to see if that's really great. Now, did you have, so I've had health issues in my late 30s, 37, that those issues still thread through my writing. Even though I feel I've put them away and that it's over and I've moved on, it still lingers. Do you notice in your writing, even when you're writing completely different genres, that there's a thread of you in each one? You know, if you're writing about ponies, are you in there? Are there themes?
Yeah, there's definitely bits of me in everything that I write. Yeah, and you're right, you know, whatever it is, and obviously when I was writing the children's books, there were lots of things that happened, you know, when I was younger, so that kind of goes in, the actual events go into the book, the emotions that you feel, and that is very much the same with the poems. Yeah, very much so. I mean, I've written quite a few what I call my angry poems, which are rants, and if something happens and it just makes me really, really angry, then I find that's quite a useful way of processing it, to write down the thoughts and the emotions, and to just write down whatever words are coming into my head, and then at some point it might very quickly become a poem, or it might become a poem at a later stage. But I've actually found that quite a helpful process. But yeah, definitely. And I mean, I was thinking the other day, I think, you know, what we're doing, watching, listening to at the time, we kind of absorb it all, and it does influence our writing. And I remember reading some dialogue in something that I'd written many, many years ago when I was watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Me too.
And I love the dialogue in it. And I was rereading some dialogue that I'd written in one of my books, my Teenage Pony books. And I knew straight away reading that dialogue that's when I was watching Buffy, because I was influenced by the humor and the way it was written. It wasn't copying it in any way, but I just knew that that's kind of what was going on at the time. And I think you can do that when you sort of look back at work and you can read something and think, oh yes, okay, that was happening at that time. So yeah, it's quite a fascinating process.
Yeah, you seem like an explorer to me when you talk about the different genres that you come in and out of. It's really hard for me to write outside of the way I write, like to don other, like you said, horror. Buffy is one of my favorite shows. I rewatched it during the pandemic, the entire series, because the writing is so smart and the characters have such distinct voices. Willow in particular, I love the way she speaks. And you are like an explorer. You go into poetry and you write some horror poetry. You do horror, you do children's work or teen work. Is that something that you find easy to do? How does that work for you? I have such a difficult time jumping from one thing to the other. I think that's pretty cool.
I think because I've always done it. And yeah, I do enjoy exploring different things. I love learning new things. That's kind of what motivates me, really. I just love learning. Yeah, it's not something I've ever found that difficult, I suppose. And I like research. I enjoy research, so I like learning how to do those things. And I think also because when I was in salaried work, which I haven't been for a long time, but when I was, I did a lot of copywriting and stuff like that. So you would have to write in the house style, and I found that quite an interesting challenge, trying to sort of write something but in somebody else's style, to suit that. So yeah, I said it's writing for different genres, different audiences, and it's all writing and it's all creative. And so yeah, I just love words. I just love playing with words, basically.
Very cool. Now, do you have any literary heroes that you draw on for inspiration?
Oh gosh. I don't think there's anyone in particular, to be honest. I do read quite widely. No, there isn't really anyone in particular I can think of. I mean, poetry, I do. I love E. Cummings' poetry, and when I was in my teens, I discovered Edith Sitwell, and I loved how she kind of played with words and patterns and colours and music in the words. And I find, I'm also a musician. I was a classically trained singer and play the piano. And for me, poetry and music are so closely linked. Poetry is all about music and rhythm and pacing. And so I suppose I kind of look for that when I read poetry. Obviously you look for a connection, some way of connecting, but for me the rhythm and the pattern and the color and the sounds of all the words are all the things that really stimulate me. That's
really interesting. Do you have anything recorded that I can look up and listen to? Because I'm all about it. I think that to me is the ultimate expression for me of human. What makes us human is music in general. Do you have any recorded or?
I have, but a very, very, very long time ago. I did a music degree in the 1980s, and so I did write music and I wrote songs and yeah, and that's kind of what I was going to do. I was going to be a classical singer, but that didn't work out for various reasons. But yeah, I love this. I love listening to music. Again, all sorts of different styles and types of music. I had a phase where I would go around folk clubs, singing at folk clubs, and used to do pop songs and jazzy stuff as well as folk songs. But that was a long time ago. I keep saying that was a long time ago, which makes me sound really old. I'm 61, and I'm 61, and I feel my age in a way that I never did before. I mean, when I was in my 50s, I thought, oh, I'm never going to feel old. And
that's how I feel. That's how I feel in my 50s. I'm like, I am so young. I do not feel old at all. And I'm always surprised when I'm tired. Like, why am I tired? That doesn't make sense. Now, you got a higher advanced degree at 57, correct? Did that say in your bio? Now, what was that degree, and how did that come about? How did you get into that and decide?
Well, I've kind of sort of, because I love learning. I've studied throughout my life. All the time I was working full time, I was studying lots of different things. So I got a teaching certificate, a marketing diploma. I did my music degree when I was a mature student in the 80s. It was kind of a bit weird, really. Before I did the MA in creative writing, I did an MSc in science, communication and society. And that was years before, and both my parents died of cancer within 5 months of each other, and it was one of the most horrendous times in my life. And after that, you start thinking about things and thought about what I wanted to do, and I think at the time, because everything had been so uncertain, I was looking for something concrete. I wanted certainty in my life, so I decided that the key to certainty was science, and I'd never done science. I'd never understood science when I was at school. And I was really interested in scientific developments, especially medical, and thought, okay. I found this MSc at University of Kent, and it was all about science communication. So I thought that's absolutely fascinating because it combines creative writing and marketing, and I'd learn all this new stuff around science. And so I thought I would do this just to learn about this new stuff. It's not going to be a new career or anything, but I just want to learn. And it was so stimulating to go back to university after all that time. There were a few other older students, but it was mostly younger students, and it was just wonderful. It was just such a stimulating environment. And I learned about the history of medicine, the history of science, which was just so fascinating. And wonderful 2 years of part-time study and just learning so much. And I loved it, but I thought, okay, that's it. I'm not going to be doing any more study. It's done. Won't be doing this again. I've done my MSc, that's it. And then I decided I wanted to do, a few years later, I can't even remember why, I wanted to do a PhD in creative writing. I think because a lot of people that I knew were doing PhDs, and because I'd got sort of a master's level, everyone, oh, that's what you do next, you do a PhD. I thought, well, I don't want to teach, and that's often like a teaching route. But I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to do a PhD in creative writing? Because a lot of the PhDs were basically, you wrote a novel, that was your PhD. And I thought, well, if I could get a grant to do that, wouldn't that be great to get a grant for basically being paid to write a novel for a few years? That sounds great. So I attempted to do a proposal, which was way harder than I thought, made a total mess of it and got rejected. Tried again and got rejected. Didn't know what I was doing. And although I've got quite a lot of qualifications, I don't think of myself as particularly academic. The thing I always struggled with was essays. Not very good at writing essays. And interesting when you said about me being an explorer, one of the tutors had said to me once with my essays, he said, reading your essays is just like going on this wild journey. This it's just like traveling on this wild journey, because you take all these tangents, you go all over the place. And so I didn't get very far with that. And then another fellow writer said to me, well, what you should really do, there's a route to this in writing, you know, you need to do an MA in writing and then you do a PhD. Okay, well, I don't really want to do that. In the end, that is kind of what I did. I ran the university and thought, I looked at the syllabus and thought, well, actually, there's loads of really interesting stuff in there that I didn't know anything about. So yeah, it might be really interesting. So I did the MA, but I did it on writing a novel, because I've always had this, you know, idea that I want to be able to write a literary novel. I thought that'd be great. I'll learn how to do that. And the first year, yeah, it was great. It was really interesting. And in the second year of the course, met another mature student who is my writing buddy. We Zoom every 2 weeks and talk about writing. And she's just been great and really supportive. And she said to me, have you ever thought about doing poetry? And you can actually sit in on the poetry module as an extra. You won't be assessed or anything, but you can sit in and learn with the other students, join the seminars. So I said, oh, that sounds really interesting. So I did that, and I just loved it. I just loved it from the word go. So I sat in, and at the end of the series of seminars, I wrote a poem, got the chance to read it out to everybody, which is absolutely terrifying, and it's really well received. And two of the guys in the group were really lovely and way younger than me, and said, actually you should do more of this. So I thought, yeah, well, maybe. I've not studied poets or poetry or anything like that. And what I ended up doing, I kept going sort of with the novel writing, but in the end, the sort of stuff that I was writing, students were saying, it's kind of more poetry than prose. And I mean, the whole sort of hybrid thing really fascinates me anyway. So right at the last minute, I decided to change my dissertation from novel to poetry, even though I'd never been assessed on poetry at all. So it was a big risk, and I'm very risk averse. So it was
that's so funny. That is exactly what I would think you weren't. That's the opposite of how I see you from just what we're talking. I'm like, wow, this is my literary hero, someone who gets to be, who takes chances. You've taken a lot of chances for someone who's risk averse.
Well, I never really thought about it like that. But with this, I thought this is a massive risk. But yeah, you had to write a portfolio of poetry for the dissertation, and I did, and I loved it. And before I'd even did that, I started writing more poems and sending poems out to magazines and things like that. And so for me, it was kind of the best decision ever. And I got I got my MA, and so it was worth doing. It was worth doing, definitely. But I kind of haven't sort of stopped since then. And I do write a lot of poetry. I send a lot of poetry out, a lot. So obviously I get a lot of rejections, but it's like anything with writing. You do get loads and loads and loads and loads of rejections, and you have to be thick-skinned, and it is really hard sometimes because you just feel like, oh, I'm going to give up. But you just get one acceptance. If you got like 30 rejections and one acceptance, that just seems to make all the difference, and it just gives you that little buzz, that little bit of confidence, thinking, oh, maybe I'll keep going, maybe I'll keep trying. So yeah, I think I better take a breath now.
Oh no, this is so very interesting. We talk to a lot of writers, and there's a similar journey. There's a journey of self-discovery with everyone. Is there anything that your work has shown you about yourself through time that you didn't really have a grasp on, but then looking back, like you look back at your work, has it shown you anything about yourself that you hadn't noticed?
It certainly showed me something about my writing that I hadn't noticed. And I think that writing poetry has had a really big impact on how I write anything, basically. So it's affected the way I write short stories, just everything. And I think when I started writing when I was much younger and in my 20s, when you have so much confidence quite often in your 20s, so much unwarranted confidence about your abilities to do certain things, when I would write, I didn't have drafts. And didn't do much editing. Basically, my first draft was my final draft. Didn't edit. And I used to work in London. I used to commute on the train, and it would take an hour getting into London, an hour coming out. And in that hour going out, I'd write 1,000 words, and the hour coming back, I'd write 1,000 words. So I just used to use all that time. And I suppose in a way I was editing as I went, but I would, write the story, read through it, make any corrections that were needed, and that would be it. I didn't think it needed any editing. And what I've really, really learnt since then with the poetry is that it's all about editing and making decisions and choices about where the words go. And I've realised that I absolutely love editing. For me, it's the best bit about writing. I just love the editing. And I think when you were talking to O'Sheen, he was saying about sort of sculpting, making almost like it's making a sculpture, and that's what I definitely feel with putting the words together for poetry. It is like that. You kind of hacking away at a piece of clay and you know, taking bits off and adding bits, and eventually you get to what you want. But that's kind of how I feel the process is. So it's all about the editing, and so now I'm an editing addict. So when I write short stories, there might be 20 versions of that short story, because I will do edit after edit after edit compulsively. And you get to a stage where you think, okay, you need to stop editing now, but you've got to kind of let it go. But I always find something that I can improve on. And with the poetry, and sometimes I've written a poem and I've thought, yes, I'm happy with that. That's exactly as I want it. And then maybe a year down the line, I'll come across the poem again and think, okay, well, that wasn't very good. You know, maybe I should have done this. Maybe I could do this. So then I will change things. And even just, you know, taking a word out or changing a word. And I think the two things that I really learned from the MA, that I kind of carry with me, was one of the tutors said to me, pay attention. And when he said it to me, it was in a very strict voice, and it was almost like, oh gosh, I'm being told off, pay attention. But he didn't mean it in that way. It was just pay attention. And that's kind of like my motto for everything in life. And he was just so right, because so much of the time we don't pay attention to things that we should be paying attention to. And I absolutely got it. I didn't get it at the time when I was on the course. It was a long time after that where I realized I understand what he means by pay attention. So again, with the right, you know, paying attention to every single word. And one of the other tutors, he would take a poem and he would go through it with you, and he would, like, every single word. Why did you use that word? Do you need that word? Do you need that comma? Do you need that? Why did you choose that word? And again, it's being able to sort of to move things, and to, you know, sometimes you might have a word where you think, I love that word, I really want to use that word in that poem, that's just such a good word. And it's very hard if it doesn't work, and you think, squeeze it in somehow, and you've got to take that and think, no, okay, you might be able to use that for something else. Yeah, so for me, I try and adopt that kind of sort of philosophy to all of my writing. You know, so look, and I think the process of the editing for me is, I think another writer had said this, and I totally get it. You read through your versions, your drafts, again and again and again and again, until you get to a point where nothing jars, and then it's all about the flow. And if it flows without jarring, then you're kind of pretty much there. So again, it's this whole kind of thing about music, isn't it? It's this kind of musical flow, and everything just feels right. Nothing's kind of out of place. So if that makes sense.
It does. I tend to read things aloud when I'm taking in submissions. I read them aloud a lot. So that's why I sneak off into other rooms and just read it, because if I stop on something, I know maybe something can be clarified, something can be changed or not, you know, depending on, we're not like forceful editors where we're like, edit this out. You know, we want people's work to speak for itself, unless it's really, you know, like a misspelled word or something like that. But there is a flow that I look for in writing, where I can talk. It's like comes like it's downloaded into my mind. Yeah. Your paying attention comment is really important to me, because I have attention deficit syndrome. I am actually ADHD diagnosed, and it's hard for me to pay attention. It's easy for me to hyper focus, but it's different than paying attention. Hyper focus, you're not necessarily paying attention to anything but the one thing in front of you. I'm gonna work on that. I think that there's something to be said with the paying attention aspect of your writing and anything you do, taking that time and attention. I move through things super fast, like lightning speed. My productivity, I'm an excellent machine, but I'm not, but it's not the same as of really paying attention. I love that. Um, do you have anything coming out that you'd like people to know about, that you have in process?
I haven't got anything at the moment that's coming out immediately. I mean, my first collection was published by Beer Press, same as Oisin,
Yeah.
and that was last July. So I have. If it's okay, can I hold it? My book?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
So this was my collection, Edible, and Michelle, the editor, who's amazing, she designed the cover for the book and everything, which was a response to the poems. So, I mean, when she accepted that, I mean, I remember the email coming through from her and everything, and I just couldn't believe it. And so I'm really, really so happy that I have that. Yeah, so if anybody wants to sample Edible, it's about it's kind of exploring family, food. There's a lot of food in there, and and kind of issues around I'm dyspraxic and I have all sorts of weird food anxieties, and again, when I was writing the poetry, I didn't realise that's what I was writing about, and then you read it and think, okay. And when I put the collection together, I'd sort of heard from other poets, they were saying, oh, see if you can find, themes that are running through your poems. And I was thinking, it's just so hard putting together a collection, isn't it? And I was thinking, themes, well, there's probably a theme of identity in there. There must be a theme of this, and the things that I thought. And then I spread all the poems out and I looked at them and I thought, good God, nearly every one of these has got food in it. No idea that everything had food in it somehow. And then I realized, okay, well, that's kind of the connection, really, isn't it? So yeah, it's kind of memories and connections between family and memory and food and the body and all of those kind of things. So, and there's a lot of humor in there, and dark humor. I really like dark humor. So that's kind of the only thing I suppose at the moment. I'm sending my pamphlets and collections everywhere constantly, and I've got a stack of rejections. I just get constant rejections, but I mean, my dream would be to get another collection, and I have got another pamphlet that with another press, that's it's a micro chapbook which will be coming out at some stage this year, and that's with you can pre-order it with Porkbelly Press, who I absolutely love, and that's called My Lost Womb Still Sings to Me, and there are poems about hysterectomy and female aging and issues around visibility as you get older, and all of those kind of things. Yeah. So they're the two things at the moment.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm so glad we got a chance to sit down and talk. This has been really, really wonderful. You are an explorer, and that's the first thing I thought of just talking to you. I'm like, oh, I love it. I'm a viner. I go from one thing to the next. Exploring's different. It's delving in, it's getting your feet wet, it's getting your hands dirty. I'm really excited to see what you have coming up. And I am going to pick up Edible because I come from a food culture. My mother's side, it's food all the time. And all the amazing things surrounding it and all the detriment surrounding being so involved in a food culture as well. Especially as an American woman, where food is always an issue, it seems like, in most of our lives. So I'm really interested in reading that. But I thank you so much for coming on. This has been really great. I thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I hope I haven't gone on for too long. That's the trouble. I can ramble on without even stopping to breathe. So sorry about that.
Not at all. I love it. Listen, that's what I want. I want to know. I want to hear about, I'm a curious person. I find speaking with writers in particular, artists in general, really inspires me, makes me happy, forms connections. it's been a rough couple years in this world with the pandemic, and making amazing connections with writers. I loved hearing about it. I felt connected in that we had a lot in common, actually, as you were talking. And that's what I'm kind of trying to find. Like, we have a lot in common and we all have something to learn. So I really appreciate you talking a lot. It made my life a lot easier, actually. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.